Underdog stories shouldn't happen in sim racing. The virtual 24-hour of Le Mans, the NASCAR Coca-Cola Series, the Porsche Esports Super Cup, these events are battled and won by established pro sim racing names with corporate backings. There simply isn't room for the average Joe to compete. Well, except for one place. Daytona, the casino of motorsports. Its champions too have historically been gatekept by professionals, but always with a tinge of hope that someone could crack this pantheon. This is the story of one man who stepped from the shadows to etch his name into the pantheon.
This no-namer.
I don't know if I had ever seen Lake Peterson in a race.
Just another name on the entry form.
The story of an absolute nobody shocking the sim racing world only to disappear as quickly as he came. This is the story of last lap miracles, post-race controversies, disqualifications, litigations. This is the story of Lake Peterson. To a casual audience, iRacing might be best known for their virtual events, such as the 24 Hours of Daytona, Spa, Nürburgring, just to name a few. But what is the crown jewel of iRacing's other side, oval racing? Two answers come to mind immediately. One, the Indy 500, which has had a murky recent history with iRacing, and the other is the Daytona 500. But for Daytona in particular though, the oval community faces a problem. Unlike road endurance races where the vast majority of racers sign up for a single time slot, iRacing's Daytona 500 sees a lot of equal and separate splits across the week. So which of these is the Daytona 500? According to the oval community, none of them. What replaces the prestige of an officially sanctioned iRacing Daytona 500 are third-party events run by other organizations, and the most notable of these is probably the Podium 500 run by Podium Esports.
Yeah, I mean, the Podium 500 was one of the biggest events that, was put on that wasn't actually like an iRacing sanctioned event.
Offering thousands of dollars in cash prizes, a professional broadcast, and most importantly, 400 entrance slots open to everybody, this system allows everybody in iRacing to have a shot instead of gatekeeping those with just the highest I rating. They do this through a long heat race process that takes multiple days. And on January 26, 2022, Lake Peterson signed up for the Podium 500 after being reminded by his friend Justin.
I don't know if I had ever seen Lake Peterson in a race. That was probably the first experience I had with him.
I knew his name from his entry form. That was about it. Just another name on the entry form, to be honest, at the time.
I think I was the only human being in all of iRacing, other than maybe you, who knew who Lake was. Lake was one of my customers, and he always requested the same Hooters Chase Elliott paint scheme on absolutely everything, and he was my favorite for it because I always knew what to expect.
They both had raced the prior year with no success to boast, but at this point, Lake was just a little bit more than a rookie.
A little bit of background around me is I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and ended up meeting Justin through a friend of a friend, and basically he got me hooked on iRacing.
Though he was a lifelong race fan, Lake was raised on a farm in rural Oregon without any internet connection that could support online video games, so his racing games of choice were Mario Kart on the Wii and NASCAR 08 on the PS3. He had only been introduced to iRacing about 1 year prior when he was at college.
One of our mutual friends, he actually had iRacing downloaded, and I was like, I had heard about it before. I was like, man, I gotta try that. I got on, tried, I think it was like Charlotte with like legacy trucks or something like that. You're like, oh yeah, you're not doing too bad. You're not doing too bad. It's probably you've been doing this or whatever. I was like, oh, this is my first try. Like, oh damn, you're actually doing pretty good then.
On Lake's second ever lap in iRacing, in which it was the first time he had ever raced on a steering wheel, he set a lap time that would have gotten pole on any race and pickup cup for the entire week. Needless to say, Lake was a natural, and he was hooked. Fast forward a year later, and did Lake set the world on fire as an iRacing prodigy? Not even close. Lake kept mostly to his favorite league, the Northwest Cup Series, which he won over 10 races as a rookie in 2021. And though he didn't really have a fun time racing official races, he still quietly went from a rookie to about 3,500 I rating. And though this isn't a number to scoff at, he didn't gain any attention going into the Podium 500. He was just there to have fun. First, before any heat races were run, everybody had to do a qualifying lap. This lap Lake practiced for hours leading up to his session because a good starting position in the heats meant a lot better chance of getting through. And that work paid off because Lake was able to start 5th in his heat out of 40 cars, where only the top 8 would go straight to the duels.
Shoot, I felt so nervous. Even under running the caution laps, I was like, oh my gosh, don't screw this up.
But Lake didn't show up to his heat to just race top 8. He wanted to win. And in a field peppered with pro drivers and higher rated drivers, you would think that this would be a tough ask, but Lake was up to the challenge. Lake spent the majority of his 20-lap heat controlling the front of the pack, especially using the bottom lane to pull ahead and then making perfectly timed blocks up top. And then, after a few green-white checkers, he was aided by the fact that they wouldn't stop wrecking and easily locked in his first place finish under the yellow. Maybe this heat win would get Lake some attention, but unfortunately, with how much of a wreckfest that race was, not many people paid attention to the winner.
I don't think anyone cared, mainly because it was just so chaotic. It's like anyone can luck their way into getting on the front row and then running 0 green flag laps after that.
But now there's only one race between Lake and his goal, making the main event. And this event theoretically should have been even easier than his heat race, because now 20 out of the 40 cars in the duels will head on to the main event. But as evening came and the track lights turned on, it became very clear that this race was going to be a lot more of a challenge. Though he was benefited by a good start position, Lake could not have the same control over the pack that he did in his heat race, with drivers like Zach Novak and Donovan Strauss controlling the field. By the halfway point of the race, Lake had fallen back to 30th position and unable to make any progress towards the front.
Nothing went as planned, losing track position very early on and trying to make it up, and that just not panning out.
Now, arguably the most important part of these longer length Daytona races is the green flag pit stops, because one little mistake like sliding through your pit box will lead you into losing the draft and destroying your race without getting a caution. The whole pit cycle is made even more difficult for somebody like Lake Peterson, who had no teammates or friends in the race with him. So instead of being in a voice call trying to choreograph when to come into pit road, Lake is going to have to play pure reaction and follow who he thinks is a group that can keep him in the pack. But even with perfect braking on entry and a solid pit stop, Lake was the first one out of the draft and watched the front pack drive slowly away from him. This led to a brand new challenge in the race, as Lake was in a group of 7 cars fighting for 4 spots. But in a shock twist, instead of everybody fighting each other, they all worked together to get back up to the main pack and give everybody a better shot. Now it was really a dogfight.
In the back for the transfer spot. Zach Novak to the inside, but the time is not there. Here comes Strauss, 3 wide to the line, but as they charge for the start finish line, it's Zach the Merchant.
And everyone starts wrecking. And at that point, I was just like praying to God that I got across. Basically pure luck.
Squeaking in 19th out of the 20 possible transfer spots, Lake barely makes the podium 500. But dominating the front of the pack, 5 pro-level drivers, which was an omen to come. February 13th, 2022, the day of the 4th annual Podium 500. While it is true that every year a few underdogs make the main event, every single winner thus far has been a previous or current pro license holder.
Gets to the bottom, and as they come to the line, it is Casey Kerwin.
So Lake has his work cut out for him, because not only is the field a stronger field than he's ever raced in before, but also he has to start at the back of the pack with no reputation at all. And at Daytona, reputation is everything.
I knew it was going to be a long race, certainly the longest one I've ever done on the service. During that time, I just tried to be patient, not make any major mistakes, and definitely not be the clown.
Because around the field of 43 cars were many teams and drivers working together, but Lake had none of this, so he had to build his reputation from the ground up. And by lap 20, Lake had moved his way all the way up into the top 10. But he wasn't done there, because lap 33 of 300, Lake made his way to the lead, passing Casey Kerwin on the inside line. Using his strategy of riding the bottom lane no matter what, Lake was in the top 5 and top 10 for the majority of the first half of the race. Many people who never knew who he was before got used to that Aether Inhaler's paint scheme.
Up to the front and at the stripe, Peterson got it by 34 one-thousandths of a second.
But on lap 77, a new strategy entered the play: green flag pit stops. With this early next-gen car, there were a couple weird things that went on with it. One of those things was that a pack of 5 or 6 cars back-to-back would draft faster than a 2x2 pack. Because of this, a lot of people would team up with other drivers to short pit the field and then gain an advantage on him. A well-timed short pit would lead to a group of 6 cars being able to pull away from the field indefinitely.
So we kind of coordinated throughout the race, I think on like a secondary radio channel, about pit stops and things like that.
So while Lake pitted with the majority of other cars with a well-executed pit stop, he still found himself behind the first group. This lead pack of 5 drivers were all Pro Series: Donovan Strauss, Zach Novak, Garrett Maines, Seth DeMerchant, and Liam Brotherton. And they wanted to fight for this win amongst themselves with no other pack to worry them.
We pitted together in a little small group, got ourselves aligned.
They ended up pulling the field by about 6 seconds before a caution came out around lap 92. This put Lake back into contention, so he went back to work. 86 laps to go, a wreck happened right in front of him, giving him some right front damage, but thankfully it was able to be fixed. After a fairly uneventful next 50 laps, there was a caution that put the field at just out of their pit range. This scenario led to a lot of strategy being played. Do you try to pit with the majority of the field, or do you try to short pit the field, or do you try to stay out and try to catch a caution? With no friends in the field, Lake Peterson felt that he only had one option: to react to the pros.
I think you and I were like kind of back and forth on the fence of like what we should do, who we should pit with. And coming off turn 4, I was like, okay, I got to pit with these guys because probably Garrett Maines and a few other like big name people. And I was like, okay, these are the people you want to be with. They're going to be up front.
And so as the group of pros went to short pit for their final fuel-only pit stop, the next lap, Lake dove into his own pit. This is where starting last actually benefited him, because he was able to enter his pit stall a lot harder than most other people were able to. And with the exact perfect execution and a very minimal amount of fuel added to the car, he was able to leave pit road in a position to stay in the front draft.
Coming off turn 4, there were so many things that happened to make sure that we came out with them at the right time. It was, I don't know, it was like one of the craziest, most unplanned things we could have done in the race.
After the pit stop cycle settled, who was left but a group of 6 pro-level drivers and Lake Peterson riding along in 7th.
Pushed as hard as we could, coordinated, rotating, pushing cars, everything we could, and checked out. Like, we had that race won for sure.
But just as he thought that he had a top 7 position locked in the Podium 500, a caution came out. So instead of fighting in a line of pros, Lake was now back in the bunch of cars, still with a decent track position, but he found himself with 3 laps to go in 10th position. But just as they always seem to happen, a caution flies, just in the nick of time for overtime. And if there's one guarantee about overtime at Daytona, it is chaos.
I don't even think in my mind I was like even giving myself the possibility that I could even win.
Lake found himself lined up in P6, third on the outside line on a green-white checker. In front of him were names like Truck Series driver Raja Caruth and Pro Series drivers Seth DeMerchant, Liam Brotherton, and Garrett Maines. It was Garrett Maines who might have been the hungriest for this victory, because even though he was already a pro going into his second year, he still felt like he had a lot to prove.
I was a very impatient driver when I first got on here, and that was the case for like years. So I feel like this was like around that turning point.
But the Podium 500 was about more than just the prize. It was about winning the Podium 500.
Back then, to be able to win the Podium 500 was probably one of the biggest races of the year.
The green flag waves with 2 to go. Liam Brotherton pushes ahead of Seth DeMerchant via a push from Raja Caruth. Lake runs third on the outside. They take the white flag. Liam Brotherton covers the bottom with Seth DeMerchant pushing him. Lake's job now is to push Raja Caruth up to the lead, but he is not able to hook up very well and can't get the run. Maines pulls up in front of Caruth and starts drafting towards the lead.
If Maines continues the momentum he's got, he gets to DeMerchant's right rear, it'll suck DeMerchant back, and I'm good. Like, race is won at that point. They're going to be racing for second. I'm good. I'm in the clears.
But then Caruth bails on the outside line, taking a run at the bottom.
I felt like if Raja had stuck with me on that backstretch, that would have trapped Seth on the bottom.
Inexplicably, Raja. Ah!
But then off turn 4, hell breaks loose.
So I kind of faded high, and I'm like, okay, should be all right. And he jumps to my right ear anyway, like right between the wall. And I panicked. I'm spinning around backwards, and now I just feel terrible. Because not only did I cost myself, but then I cost Seth as well.
Garrett Maines was in front of me, and then I kind of squeaked through behind him, and I definitely had more momentum than him.
Like, I was literally 10 feet from it.
And so I tried to side draft him.
Gonna come. Who's gonna make it? DeMerchant goes high. Brotherton tries to block. They get the fence. There they go. Garrett Maines, I think, is gonna get clear of everyone. No, it was Lake Peterson. It was Lake Peterson who gets the win in the Podium 500 as they all wrecked at the line.
It's almost hysterical. Like what just happened? Like, this is unbelievable. Like, what? It still doesn't feel like it actually even happened.
It was Lake Peterson who crossed the finish line in first place, but little did he know that was just the beginning of it. Watching the replay back, the two cars that emerged from the wreckage towards the start-finish line was Garrett Maines and Lake Peterson, with Lake just getting to his bumper. Both cars begin to turn down the track, and then a hook.
You know, I was pretty upset after the race because I'm like, that was a clear right hook.
Garrett Maines into the outside wall, and Lake Peterson across the start-finish line.
I wish it would have went over a little bit smoother, but at the end of the day, it's who crosses the finish line first. So it was so cool to be a part of that.
After a few minute delay of race control to review the finish, they deemed Lake Peterson the winner of the Podium 500.
Way to describe that. It ended just like every race when there's a lot of money on the line at Daytona, and really it ended almost like every other iRacing Daytona race, period.
All I know is that obviously initially I was jazzed that Lake won because I was the only human being that knew Lake.
But almost immediately was a protest filed by Garrett Maines, who still crossed the finish line in second place, but second place didn't mean anything at that point.
You should have called it then. When they didn't call it then, I'm like, okay, well, I know what the rules say. And I got a phone call that said, all right, we realized our mistake. Send in your appeal. You know, they're going to overturn it. I'm like, okay. So I turn around and we send in the appeal.
So everybody waited, not knowing who the actual winner of the Podium 500 was. The decision seemingly coming from a group of people mysteriously known as the Gaming Council.
Instantly, I'm not going to start name calling anybody, there were a few guys didn't want that precedent to be set of right rearing somebody to win a race, and that's what their argument was, and that was their instant argument.
And after over an hour of silence and deliberation, Lake Peterson was penalized, and the winner of the Podium 500 was Garrett Maines.
So then they flip it, and I feel bad for Lake in this moment. I'm starting to get texts from Lake and from Garrett talking about this. And I'm like, I painted both the cars. You know, one of my cars that I painted is going to win.
Seemingly the greatest underdog win of sim racing history was gone in the blink of an eye. But somehow, over 5 hours since the green flag had dropped, this race was far from over. Podium released a public statement and hosted a public Discord town hall to explain their decision, but this did not stop the social media outrage. Many felt like they just saw an underdog get a win unfairly ripped away from them, almost like a Regan Smith type deal.
And that kind of created like World War III. It was like everyone against Podium.
I remember everyone got their pitchforks out, and there was quite the riot. The way that seemed to get painted was, I was definitely the bad guy. I heard about it at work the next day. Like, I was on the phone with the customer, and they're like, oh, Garrett Maines? Yeah, I heard you stirred up quite the mess last night.
The decision even caused tension among Podium themselves.
Pretty sure the terminology would be, I quit before I even got back to the plane. That's how irritated I was with this whole deal. And another one of my really good friends runs the company now, and I'm very happy for him. I want to go ahead and put that on record. Brandon and Ryan and those guys, I will call them out because they're awesome guys.
But that night, Lake and his team were pretty much quiet.
I had my lawyer get involved, and aka Justin Yee, and basically wrote up this document, had video evidence, had input and everything of like where everything was exactly.
Along with this, they had found a section of Podium's own rulebook and passed it on to the event organizers. This section in Podium's rulebook states, penalties for violations are at race control's sole discretion. And while there was a section about appealing penalties, there was no verbiage saying that you could appeal a no call on a penalty. And as they had seen from how the events played out, Race Control had deemed Lake the winner.
That was my call of race is good. I mean, it's a typical Daytona ending, and that's the way I saw it at the time.
The council of people that decided to penalize Lake had no right to, according to their own rulebook.
I mean, they were backed into a corner at that point. I mean, after all the information you presented with, there was nothing you could do.
The next morning, a new announcement was made with slightly less fanfare.
And that's how it got overturned. Apparently, now that I learned that, I didn't know that you guys did that.
Lake Peterson's penalty has been overturned, and once again, he was the winner of the 2022 Podium 500. And while the event is most known in the community for the drama that it caused, it should not take away from an overall incredible story.
It stings just a little bit. That race is definitely the race that like got my name out there. I just started streaming like, I don't know, 3 months prior, and that was the race that for like a month after that, there were probably 300 people watching. It was a complete like 500% increase in viewership because of all of the drama that stemmed from that race.
But the race has stayed in the memory banks of all oval iRacers, and not just because of the drama, but because of the mysterious figure that is Lake Peterson. Because as quickly as Lake burst onto the scene, he disappeared.
Life comes at you fast type of deal. Fiance, soon to be wife, and I bought a house, so we're doing that. I have the rig behind me, along with multiple boxes. Oh, there's the rig. And so just trying to get life organized and hopefully be back soon. I certainly miss it.
But the best part about who Lake Peterson is that he could be anyone.
I'm basically just a casual race fan that somehow got hooked on iRacing one day.
Before, it didn't seem possible that anybody could come and beat the pros at their own game. But Lake Peterson showed that on a good day, with perfect execution, a little bit of luck, and maybe a little bit of drama, anybody can join the pantheon of sim racing greats.